Okay, great. So I think we're ready to go ahead and start the stream. Okay, fabulous. Thank you so much, Trish. And thanks everyone for joining us again. This is Kristen Nevedal. It's 3:39. We are obviously running just a few minutes late. We're going to go ahead and get started here in just a moment. The stream is up and working. So today's presentation and meeting discussion will be recorded. You'll be able to find that on the county's YouTube page. And then it will be posted to the department's website, to our 2023 events page, just as soon as we get it back from YouTube, so to speak. We'll also be posting the slides, and I want to thank Trish Tracy, who's with us today. She is the queen of slide posting, setting up these meetings, adminning the meetings, and assisting us with all things technical. So thanks so much. And let's just go ahead and get into today's presentation. Oh, good. Okay, it's working well. Okay. So our agenda today, we're going to look at a couple important dates. We're going to talk about following fencing requirements, planning and building permits, and then we'll make some time for discussion. And just a reminder on how to participate in today's meeting. If you're using the Zoom platform, whether on your phone, your iPad, your whatever your device might be, in your toolbar, you should be able to find the Q&A chat feature. It's a little speech icon, so to speak, and says Q&A. If you just click on it, it'll pop open a window that'll allow you to send questions to the panelists and to the panelists only. The panelists today are myself, Kristen, and Trish Tracy. So if you'd like to pop a question in, because we're on a slide where the question comes up, feel free to type in your question or your comment. We'll take time at the end of the meeting to kind of go through as much of the question or as many of the questions as we can that are in the Q&A feature, and then make time for oral comments. If you do want to make an oral comment, perhaps you're not using the Zoom platform, you can raise your hand at any time during the meeting to get into the queue for oral comments. If you are using the Zoom app, you can find the raise hand symbol or icon located in your toolbar. It just looks like the palm of a hand. If you're calling in, not using the Zoom app, you can use *9 on your touch tone phone to raise your hand to get into the queue for oral comments, which again, we'll be taking at the end of the meeting. When it's time to make oral comments, we'll tell you it's your turn, tell you that you need to unmute your device. And so the mute and unmute button is also in the toolbar. If you're using the Zoom app, it looks like a microphone, often all the way to the left of that toolbar. And if you are calling in, not using the Zoom app, your mute feature is and unmute feature is *9. I'm sorry, *6. I apologize. *6 for mute and unmute. And we'll repeat this slide at the end, so don't really have to memorize these pieces. Coming up, notable dates on January 18th from 3:30 to 5 p.m. We'll be hosting our monthly LEAP meeting, Local Equity Entrepreneur Program monthly meeting. And then on January 19th, starting at 9 a.m., the Cannabis Advisory Committee's Cannabis Cultivation Subcommittee will be meeting. I did put into today's presentation, so you'll be able to link if you want to out of the slides when they're posted, the website to the agenda and meeting materials for the Cultivation Subcommittee meeting. I haven't gone all the way into them. There may be a comment period, so if you're interested in participating in that Cultivation Subcommittee, do either click through here when the slide presentation becomes available, or visit the Department of Cannabis Control's website, which is cannabis.ca.gov. We are pushing out a couple of weeks the LJAGP grant submission application timeline. We will post it as soon as we have it ready. We will have a meeting as soon as we have it ready. The application is pretty much ready. It's the guidance manual for the scope of the grant that is not completed. As soon as those materials are completed, we'll make them available to the public and schedule another meeting. And then I know the board passed their agenda or calendar for the 2023 year, but just a reminder and a heads up that January's General Government Committee meeting will be held on January 23rd this year in January. And instead of starting in the afternoon, it is scheduled to start at 9 a.m. So a little different timing than last year. So now is the time to complete your 2022 following submission. So really this slide is relevant only to folks who submitted notices of fallowing for the 2022 cultivation season. So the fallowing submissions are two-part, right? You first submit the notice of fallowing along with a site plan, and then you submit the affidavit confirming that you did truly fallow in the 2022 cultivation season. So the section that we're on right now, or the portion that we're working on right now, is getting these affidavits of fallowing in from folks who submitted notices of fallowing for the 2022 season. The affidavit has been posted to the forms and resources page. The forms and resources page is linked in this presentation, and that affidavit of fallowing notice must be filed to the Cannabis Department by 11:59 p.m. on January 31st. And so the timelines for filing the affidavit of notice, as well as the timelines for filing a notice of fallowing, are in the ordinance, and the department does not have the authority to change, extend, or rearrange timelines, so to speak. Now, because we're in this first cycle of fallowing and we're all figuring out how to do this together, we have assigned staff to email these affidavits out to folks and request them back. So if you filed your notice of fallowing and you haven't received an email from us as a reminder to file this affidavit of fallowing, please go to the website, but you'll likely still get an email from us because we've been compiling lists and we just started sending these emails out, I believe, yesterday. Further information, on the notice of fallowing. I need to adjust some windows here. My apologies. Tiny computers. Okay, closing that. Sorry. The affidavit must be accompanied by a site plan. So just like you sent the site plan with the notice of fallowing, you have to send that site plan back again with the affidavit of fallowing. And you must confirm what you fallowed on that site plan. So on the site plan, you must show the area of mature plant canopy that you fallowed. If you didn't fallow your entire mature plant canopy area, then you must show on that site plan the area that you did fallow and the square footage of the area fallowed, as well as the square footage of any area not fallowed. So we need to have enough information to know the square footage of what you cultivated, if any, and what the cumulative square footage that was cultivated. So if you cultivated 3 out of 4 beds, we need to know the square footage of each of those 3 out of 4 beds, and then we need to know what that cumulative square footage is so we know how to adjust the tax liability if it can be adjusted. The site plan should also show the area where any immature plants were grown in 2022, and it must also show the area where, if you have processing on site, any processing that occurred, whether or not processing occurred in 2022. Again, the form is posted to the forms and resources page, which you can find at the Cannabis Department website. And we can take a quick look at the fallowing form, just so folks maybe are a little more familiar with it. Let's make this full screen. So, Trish, can you confirm that you can still see my screen and that it's showing the fallowing form? Okay, interesting. Well, hopefully the notice of fallowing form is large enough that it makes sense for me to walk through. Okay, so let's try it this way. Okay, so is the actual form showing now? Okay, great. Okay, fabulous. Sorry about that. I'm working from just my laptop and it's a lot on a little screen. So this is what the notice of following form looks like. Please, please, please save it as a PDF. It is designed to work as a fillable PDF. If you fill it out in your browser, which is how I'm showing it to you all in this presentation, there's this nasty thing that happens where fields tend to disappear between filling something out in a browser setting and then sending it to the department or emailing it to another entity. So first thing you do, save it to your desktop as a PDF, open it back up as the PDF from your desktop, and then fill it in, please, and then save it again as a PDF with all that data and information in there, and then send that final one to us at mcdpod@mendocinocounty.org. The email address is up here in the corner of the form. Please do not use this section. It is for the department only. And then the rest of the sections, are for the applicant. So, of course, you're going to put the County of Mendocino in here, please. You're going to put your application or permit number, the name that shows on the application or the permit. The cultivation site address should be entered in, including the street address, the city, and the zip code. And then please do put in the year. Make sure you put in for 2022, right? Because this is the filing or the completion of the filing process for the 2022 cultivation season. And then on page 2, make sure that the applicant or the representative of the business entity, which would be named as the applicant if the applicant at the top of the page is in a business entity. The name of the individual signing on behalf of the permit or applicant holder will sign in this box. They will then print their name here. If it's a business entity that holds the application or the permit, you will type the business entity name in here. And then please don't forget to date the form, okay? Save it and then send it to us at MCD POD along with your site plan. Oh, goodness. My apologies. And that is the short of the following. We'll take questions at the end. I know folks are typing questions into the Q&A feature. I cannot see the slides and the Q&A feature without the Q&A feature overlapping the text on the slides. My apologies. So I'm not going to pay much attention to what's coming into the chat right now. It's a capacity issue with my small screen. Okay, fencing. We wanted to have a conversation about fencing today simply because we want to make sure that everyone's clear on what's required. Fencing requirements are in the ordinance. The department does have to verify that the fencing requirements are met in order for an annual permit to be issued or renewed. Yes. Oh, goodness. It still says that I'm screen sharing. Okay, let's see here. Fencing, okay. All right. Thank you for letting me know, Trish. I really appreciate it. Please do break in because I can't see the screen at all except for what's on the slides. So, okay, thank you. This is less than ideal, but thanks for bearing with us, everyone. So, as I mentioned, we wanted to have a conversation about the fencing requirements just to make sure that hopefully everyone's aware of what's in the ordinance. And then it is applicable and a required component of an annual permit to be issued or renewed. So any clarifying to the fencing, any clarification amendments or potentially the elimination of the fencing requirements that we're going to walk through here in just a minute would require an ordinance change. You can find the relevant ordinance information that we're going to walk through here and talk about in just a moment in chapter 10A17.040, subsections H and subsection B. So B as in boy and H as in Henry. We're going to start first by talking about what the fencing requirement details are in the ordinance. And specifically, these details can be found in section 10A17-040 subsection H. So the fencing requirements apply to all cannabis grown in Mendocino County, excluding indoor. So we will talk about the indoor definition on the next slide. But let's go back to the fencing requirement. It is required for all cannabis grown outdoors in a hoop house within a shade canopy, any structure that's not identified as an indoor structure. And again, we'll detail that more in the next slide. The fence itself must be at least 6 feet in height. It must fully enclose the garden area, meaning where cannabis plants will be grown. It must include a lockable gate that is locked at all times when a qualified patient, caregiver, or permittee or their agent is not in the immediate area. The fence shall not violate any other ordinance, meaning any building code, right, or provision of law regarding height or location. There's some fencing does have setback requirements depending on the parcel and the zoning. And it must not be constructed or covered with plastic or cloth, except for the fact that the ordinance does expressly say that shade cloth may be used on the inside of the fence, not on the outside, but on the inside. And shade cloth is only the covering, only sort of cloth or plastic covering that can be used. Let's see. All right. Indoor cultivation, the top language that is italicized is from chapter 10A17.020, the definitions section, and the summary is in the bullet points below. So indoor means all of the following, right? Within a fully enclosed and secured structure. That structure must have a complete roof enclosure. It must be supported by connecting walls that extend from the ground all the way up to the roof. The structure must have a foundation slab or equivalent base to which the floor is securely attached. The structure must be accessible through one or more lockable doors. The structure must be constructed with a solid material such as 2x4 or thicker studs overlain with 3/8 inch or thicker plywood. The definition expressly says that plastic sheeting, regardless of gauge or similar products, do not satisfy the structural requirements. So the reason for bringing this up is indoors does not include greenhouses, even commercial greenhouses, according to this definition. And so I just wanted to make sure that it was really clear that this fencing requirement is going to apply to a vast majority, or does apply and has always applied to the vast majority of the cultivation sites currently in the program with applications and perhaps issued permits. It is how the setbacks are measured. So in the setback section, 10A17-040 subsection B as in boy, this section says expressly how sensitive use setbacks are to be measured. And so this is true for all cannabis not grown indoors. And they use that word again in this subsection. So the measurements must be taken, or they are considered, should be measured as the distance between a youth-oriented facility, school, or a park and the cannabis, and it must be measured in a straight line from the nearest point of the fence to the sensitive use. Other relevant setbacks to consider is the distance between any residential structure that is on a neighboring parcel under a different ownership. The distance between any residential structure and cannabis shall be measured from the fence to the nearest exterior wall of the residential structure. And the distance between the property line of a neighboring parcel, legal parcel under separate ownership or access easement shall be measured from the fence to the boundary line of the legal parcel or the access easement. So we wanted to bring this up because we had some concerns that This may not have been fully implemented, and it is a requirement, and we cannot issue permits or renewals without this requirement being met. Okay. The last piece on here is a big one, and it's certainly one that I think a lot of our applicants and permit holders are struggling with, and this is planning and building permits. And what I mean by struggling with it is that there seems to be a significant number of unpermitted structures that are being shown on site plans and perhaps cultivated or utilized for the cultivation business. So a friendly reminder that under Chapter 10A 17-100, the permit review and issuance section, subsection D, right? Permit application denial section clearly states that the department may at any time during the application process deny an application based on the failure to meet the requirements of the chapter, including but not limited to the cultivation of cannabis in illegal or non-compliant structures. So if you have unpermitted structures that are associated with your project, and it's regardless of what they're used for, whether it's a hoop house used for immature plants, a greenhouse for cultivation, a barn that you're retrofitting or hoping to retrofit for processing, conducting cannabis cultivation related activities in unpermitted structures is grounds for denial. We've got a number of renewal applicants really struggling with not having building permits. We see it a lot on the applications that have been coming through the portal. We really need folks to come in and get those building permits if we're going to issue them. And there is an opportunity for new applicants, right? So applicants that have not received an annual permit yet to perhaps participate in a compliance plan that would allow for the issuance of their cultivation or nursery permit. However, right, said compliance plan only provides 12 months for you to complete those building permits, and there's no ability to extend a compliance plan. So if you enter into a compliance plan, you're agreeing to complete those building permits. And what I mean by complete is getting them to a final, they have to be finalized with planning and building in order for you to fulfill that compliance plan. And you would have to fulfill that compliance plan to be eligible for a renewed annual permit, okay? And entering into a compliance plan, you are forced to sign an agreement stating that you will not use the structures identified in that compliance plan until the building permits have been finalized, and they have to be for the appropriate use, right? So I feel like this is kind of a bit of a challenge for lots of folks, and we really wanted to have this meeting to have the conversation about just really making sure that folks understand that these do have to be completed. Your building permits have to be finalized. If you are also required to obtain, for whatever reason, an administrative permit, a minor use permit, or a major use permit from planning and building services in association with your cultivation or nursery permit from the cannabis department, those permits have to be fully issued before you can conduct the cultivation permit or nursery permit activities. So if you have, say, a setback issue and you need to apply for an administrative permit to reduce the setback or eliminate a responsibility perhaps for a legal dwelling, please don't hesitate to go out and get those setback permits, those administrative permits, or additional permits you need from planning and building, because you cannot legally operate without having that completed. We cannot issue your cannabis permit without having your administrative permit, for example, completed and issued. And so we just wanted to really make sure that we're doing our best to get that messaging out, because we are seeing a lot of open building permits, expired building permits, not applied for building permits. So it's concerning. Okay. With that said, short presentation, we are at the end of it. We're going to go to Q&A in just a minute, and I'm going to put the timer up. I think what I'll do is leave this slide up for a little bit while we go through some of the questions in the chat. It looks like there's about 4 questions in the chat, so I'm going to try to address those first. Just a reminder to everyone, the Q&A feature is open. Once the presentation is down, it'll be a lot easier for me to watch what's in the Q&A while we go through oral questions in the Q&A feature and work the timer. So you can please still feel free to use the Q&A feature as we move to discussion mode. If you're using the Zoom app, the Q&A feature is located at the bottom or in the toolbar, either at the bottom or the top of your screen most often. It's a chat box that says Q&A. Just click on it. We'll give you a separate box that you can send us a question or let us know what your comment or concern is. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to provide or participate in discussion by providing an oral comment. That raise hand feature is also in the toolbar if you're using the Zoom app. And if you're on the phone, not on the Zoom app perhaps, you can use *9 to raise your hand so you can get in the queue for providing an oral comment or question if you want to do so. When it's your turn to make an oral comment, we'll ask you to unmute your device. For those of you on the Zoom app, the mute button or icon is in the toolbar. All the way on the left-hand side of the toolbar is a little microphone that says mute under it. Just click on that and that will unmute you. Click it again, it will mute you when the time is right. And if you're calling in, you can manage the mute and unmute features by using *9 on your phone. So let's go ahead. I'm going to open these up. How can we require all the affidavits to be submitted by January 30th when we're just releasing the affidavits today? And why would this information not have gone out through Canon Notes? Can't the MCD recommend to the GGC and the BOS they pass an urgency ordinance extending the deadline of following submission? Okay, we'll break those down into 3 parts. We have to require that they're submitted by January 31st because that is the timeline stated in the ordinance. And we didn't send it out via Canon Notes today. It was human error, right? So there's the answer to that one. And we could recommend to GGC in January that the ordinance be amended. But an urgency ordinance is not going to be relevant for something like extending a following submission deadline, I don't believe. So it would be amending the ordinance, which would take several months. So please, please, please do get those affidavits in. It shouldn't take you very long unless you changed your site plan between the time that you or you didn't follow what you declared with your notice. So, send the affidavits into us with your site plan again and get that into us. The affidavit is posted and we will get it into a future Canon Note. We'll probably send it out this week. It's a great idea. So thank you for the recommendation. And let's see. Does cannabis composting areas need to be separately fenced if they are not within the outdoor growing area? I do not believe so, according to the ordinance, which references where cannabis is grown, not where cannabis is wasted, so to speak. So I don't believe that that is a requirement that is within the fenced area as it relates to the local permitting process. What does non-compliant mean? Chapter 10A17 definition or building code definition. Well, I mean, that's a building code. So if you're not compliant with the Chapter 10A17 definition for indoor, right? If we're going back to having a conversation about, I'm pretty sure the question is in relationship to this, right? So The ordinance definition is italicized here for indoors. If we're talking about the difference between how setbacks or what requires a fence and what doesn't, the definition is out of 10A17. I apologize. Non-compliant. What is non-compliant? It means that you're not meeting the rules or the regulations as defined in Chapter 10A17 or the building code. That's what non-compliant means. So there's a bunch of different pieces we've talked about today that we've talked about compliant or non-compliant. So you're either meeting the standards and the guidelines set forth in the rules and regulations of Chapter 10A17 and the building code, or you're not, which would then result in a non-compliance issue. Fencing is required for commercial greenhouses. The only time fencing is not required is going to be for indoor structures. So if the structure is not built out of something such as 2x4s or thicker studs overlain with 3x8s or thicker plywood, and meets all of the building requirements of building code, you're not going to be considered indoors. So I don't think commercial greenhouses are overlaid with 3/8 or thicker plywood. So it's a rigorous definition. So please do look at Chapter 10A17.020 for the indoor definition as well when you're looking at the fencing requirements. This is a great question. What do I do if some buildings have final permits and I have one that doesn't? What then? Can we use the ones that do have the final permits until the other is final? Absolutely. And you really should probably contact the department. If you're like under renewal review and this comes up, your reviewer will say, what's up with this building that's not permitted? You could probably throw a proposed on that building permit, both on the site plan and the structures list, and then not use it, but you really have to not use it. I mean, heaven forbid we show up for an inspection and you're using it, it is grounds for denial and or termination of a permit. So really don't use the building if it's not permitted. If you're an applicant, probably the best thing to do, unless you're really close to finaling that permit, at that building permit specifically, would be to list that building as proposed and not use it. And so really the very important piece is don't use the structure if it's not permitted. Then if we come out or we are working on your permit, you're not at risk of denial. If you put cannabis in it and you're using it and then you are get caught using it, it becomes a denial or a revocation issue. So don't use it and finish your building permits. And yes, so the question came in, back to fencing, my apologies. Do I understand that you said that the measurements from sensitive adjacent sites such as schools, property lines, neighboring residences should be taken from the fence to that sensitive use, adjacent use? Yes, that is all capitals. Yes, that is how it is supposed to be measured pursuant to the ordinance. And that is in subsection B. The sections are noted in this, let's see. As I mentioned, they're noted in today's presentation and they are linked. So chapter 10A17.040 subsection B as in boy clearly states that the measurements should be taken from the nearest point of the fence to the sensitive receptor. So it is a fence to receptor. And so that's why I wanted to make sure it got into here today. We've received a status of deprioritized and a request from the state license associated with our application permit. We supplied the requested license data. our AG number disappeared from the portal list. I cannot answer your specific AG number question while on this meeting. I would recommend to the sender of this, and I'll write it down. Hopefully we have the correct email address for you on file, but I will also request that you send this question, including your AG number, to MCD POD. AG number IGS list. Okay. I will ask someone to reach out via email tomorrow, but please, much more efficient would be to send this via email to mcdpod@mendocinocounty.org. Include your AG number, please. Restate this question if you'd be so kind, and then planner of the day tomorrow will get back to you. But I'll drop a note with planner of the day tomorrow too. But if you email us, it assures that we have the correct email address to respond to. The ag exempt ordinance does not require a final inspection before use and occupancy. That is a California Building Code requirement. The county ag exempt ordinance is a separate and distinct set of regulations from the California Building Code. Good to know. However, if you have an ag exempt permit that you're working on planning and building with, it does need to be finalized before you can utilize that ag exempt structure. So I don't know what the clarification was that we were trying to make here, but I just do want to be clear, regardless of whether it's a commercial building permit, it's an ag exempt building permit, it's a grading permit, it has to be finalized before you use the area where the permit is relevant to. The renewal issuance is being held up because of a building permit issued needing to be finalized. How long should it take to get the renewal issued after the building permit has been finalized? If that is the only thing that's outstanding, it could happen in the same moment that you provide your planner verification that the building permit has been finalized. And what can be done in permanent buildings with final Class K permits? Residential activities. So Class K permits are for residential structures, owner builder residential structures. You cannot trim in them. You can't package in them. You cannot have employees in them. So Class K permits are for residential activities. I don't know if Class K is building permit status that could be considered for cottage permits. That really is a question for planning and building. So I don't want to misspeak here, but Class K permits are for residential use only. The slide we shared, the slide you shared via PBS, maybe it has the PBS heading on it, has in the language says that we may deny an application, but not that we must. I don't know if we can choose not to deny. This is a great question. So we have a second meeting this week with County Council about the building permit issues. We're also trying to figure out kind of the maximum usage allowances, so to speak, for a compliance plan, and then what the expectations should be of the department as far as ensuring that the compliance plan is completed. So I really don't know the answer to this question, Michael. It's a good question. County Council will be bringing us some research back this week. And I think part of the reason why it might say may could be because there is the compliance plan allowance. But yeah, we'll circle back on this topic for sure, because we are, this is a broader discussion. And again, we are having some conversation about county council about exactly what may trigger that denial, and how to wrap up a compliance plan, and how liberally can we use compliance plans, so on and so forth. Mr. Davis, would you send me your question to Nevidal K, or send it to mcdpod@mendocinocounty.org? Attention, Kristen Nevidal. How many operators are currently deprioritized? I have one screen, and do not think I'm going to be opening and closing and fishing through files to get that answer right now, but we'll provide an update to GGC on this number during the January 23rd meeting. So soon come. It's still a very high percentage. So I can say we're still hovering around 50% of our active AG numbers. The numbers are higher amongst applicants as far as the percentage rates than they are amongst permit holders. So interesting statistics is that we just see a lower percentage of deprioritizations with our permit holders than we do with our applicants at this point. But this is going to be part of the update, Michael, for our next update, which will be part of the GGC meeting on the 23rd. Okay, moving past that. Where in 10A17 does it say buildings require a final permit? It doesn't say in 10A17, but you have to have a building permit. And building, you don't have a complete building permit until it's finalized. So you need to finalize those building permits. CEQA Appendix G documents will be filtered into the review timeline based on when we review your application or permit in relationship to when your provisional license expires. So we are prioritizing the review of applications and CEQA documents in relationship to, say, renewals based on the need for those documents to be submitted to the state based on the timeline associated with the renewal. That timeline will also be in the update that goes to General Government Committee on January 23rd. That timeline is also currently in the update that we brought to General Government Committee in December. I don't remember the December date for GGC offhand, but there is an update attached to the agenda for that meeting that has the timeline in it. And then furthermore, that same update that went to GGC in December of 2022 will be at the board on January 24th. So just watch the January 23rd and GGC agenda for the update and the January 24th for last year's last update. And you'll see that information. Okay, a bunch of LJAGP questions. When will MCD be releasing the grant materials for review? As soon as they're finished. When will they be presented to the MCD public meeting? As soon as they're finished. When will they be discussed by the GGC? On the 23rd. The direction from the board was to present them to the public and have them discussed at GGC prior to them being placed in action. That is, I think, possibly slightly inaccurate. So the direction from the board was to make them available to the public as soon as or at our next public meeting. We're having this meeting. They are not available. They aren't available and have not been made available because they aren't complete. So when they're ready, we will schedule a meeting and they will be ready in time for discussion at the 23rd GGC meeting. We do not have to bring them back to the board. So we could even say have opened up the application process on January 16th, according to the direction. This is about a broader discretion on the guidance. The guidance provided, does it provide enough guidance, so to speak? But again, the guidance document was not assigned to the department until December, and there is, it's a lot of work. So I'm still working on it. And as soon as I get it finished, we'll get it out to the public with the application. When we release that information, we'll also release a Q&A period and application submission period. So I think we'll be able to make it pretty clear for everyone. And we'll still provide some lead-in notice as we had planned before being assigned the guidance document. So coming soon. Okay, let's go there in just a second. I'm question about an exception, whether or not an exception can be made for the use of shade cloth on one side of the fence or the other. Really great point here is that shade cloth is often used as a windbreak, and to be effective, it needs to be installed on the windward side of the fencing, which may not be the inside of the fencing, frankly, right? And I think that's the applicant's point here, permit holder's point here, attendee, I should say. But unfortunately, the ordinance doesn't give us the ability to make a decision about whether it can be installed on one side of the fence or the other. Now, we are having some discussion about whether or not it makes sense to bring the fencing requirements back to GGC. And so we're having additional conversation with County Council about what amendments might look like for this. These concerns are super helpful in kind of letting us know how we might consider addressing this. But there really is no language in the ordinance whatsoever that allows us to create an exception or a policy exemption to the fencing piece. We ran a number of things up the flagpole, so to speak, with County Council, and really think if there's going to be any leniency or change to the fencing requirements, it's going to take an ordinance change. So really why we wanted to bring it up is because it's not something we can manage in policy, and we apologize for that. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'm going to set this at 2 minutes. Okay, that's not the right screen. Okay, let's see here. I can see a couple of hands raised. So it looks like our first caller will be Monique Ramirez, followed by Hannah Nelson. And I don't see additional hands, but again, if you want to raise your hand, the hand raise feature is in your Zoom toolbar. And if you're calling in today, you can use *9 on your phone to raise your hand. Okay, Monique, you should be able to go ahead and unmute your device and start your question or comment.
Thank you. I too have a question about the fencing. I remember long ago sitting in a BOS meeting many years ago, and I recalled that I thought there was like some sort of change that happened with fencing requirements and the visibility to the road and stuff like that. So I don't know if you could speak to any of that. Mm-hmm. And then my other question is that if people are using hoop houses, but they're just for immature plant areas, not for conducting full cultivation in like a mixed light operator would, if that still is required to also have a fence. And in my case, I have a hoop house that's next to my garden, and I would rather just add more fencing to include all of it into the same area if possible, but I don't know if that's allowed. And finally, I would love if we could touch on just renewals and where they're at right now. I know my application has been sitting on a stack of many others, and it's been 8 months now. and I still have not received any update as to when my application will be renewed and what's the holdup and whatnot. So if you could speak to some of those things, that'd be great. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so I know exactly, I think, what you're talking about, unless there's more than one fencing directive, Mo. There was a fencing directive that we dug up, and it was from 2021 when the board and the planning department were working on 22.18. And it was specific to not carrying over those fencing requirements into 22.18. And we took that directive to County Council and asked them if we could adjust how the department reviews the fencing requirement based on that directive, and we were told no. And so and this was something that I think the department was struggling with too, to be honest with everyone. We had a number of folks who had been with the department, or a couple of folks who had been with the department for a long time, that also referenced this fencing directive. So Alora dug it out with some help from folks over at Planning and Building. And the only thing we found was in reference to 22.18. But again, County Council said even if it was specific to 10A17, because it's a requirement that's expressly written into Chapter 10A17, even board directive would not provide the department the authority to not enforce the fencing requirements as stated in the ordinance. Hoop houses for immature plants are an area where cannabis is grown, so they would be subject to the fencing requirement. If you have your cannabis cultivation area ringed in a fence and you want to do an additional ring, right? And sort of like cross fence that section in, I think that would be, that would work just fine. But however you get into that hoop house area, if it comes through your garden area and the lock is on your garden area, that's great. But if you have any kind of external access into that immature plant area, you would have to put a lock on that gate as well, just to be clear. So review the fencing requirements, please. Renewals. Renewals are really being bogged down by lots of structures that have been developed with no building permits or not finalized building permits. And so it's been fairly painful for all parties. And also, we're having a hard time getting materials back within the 15-day notice windows and then within subsequent notice windows. A lot of applicants are trickling those materials into us. It just drags the reviews out really long. We have put some tracking procedures in place just to track all the dates that we send notices, what came back in detail, so we can try to shrink those timelines down to the best of our ability. But lots of unpermitted thises and thatses coming up. I mean, that is really what we're seeing significant amounts of, is just lots and lots of unpermitted structures, and it's making things very time consuming. A lot of the renewals that we're engaged in right now, and I can't speak to yours specifically, Mo, because it just came up for completion check, but hasn't been assigned for review. But a lot of the renewals that we're have with reviewers for final review are more similar to reviewing applications that were never issued than they are to reviewing a renewal. So, just please review the ordinance if you have questions, ask for guidance, but please do try to manage the compliance components to help yourself as an applicant or permit holder manage your application process and review process. And it certainly would help our department move things through a little more quickly and seamlessly, having all those permits and compliance pieces met. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Hannah Nelson. I don't have any other hands raised after you, Hannah. I'm going to go ahead and reset the clock, and you can go ahead and unmute your device and start your question or comments. Oh, are you there? Okay.
I am. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Couple of things. I'm going to bring this up at the next LEAP meeting as well, but I'm hoping that the LEAP manual can be changed to clarify the documentation regarding raids, and that it doesn't have to be camp specific, but can be any law enforcement raid for involving cannabis. That's really important, and you have the authority to change the manual, and the state doesn't require proof that the raid was conducted by camp only, so it's certainly an allowable thing for you to do without going back to the board. The next thing in the presentation, you mentioned that people need to state whether processing was done in 2022. Do you mean simply just listed on the site plan, or do you have to specify that it was processing of 2021 grown cannabis? Also, can you please send all of these helpful tips as you come up with them or present them during these meetings or elsewhere in Canna Notes? And if possible, if you could create an email list with all the applicants and permit holders, and also send helpful information to them, even if they didn't sign up for Canna Notes. There have been so many iterations that might be helpful if it's easy for MCD to do. And then finally, post everything on the MCD website. Most applicants and permit holders don't have the stomach to watch all this. With respect to the compliance plan, the ordinance does not require that the building permit be final, just obtained. However, as you stated, the building, if it's not filed with a certificate of compliance, it can't be used for any purpose that it doesn't have a permit or doesn't have the certificate of compliance issued for. But it's an important distinction because some people are waiting for funding or whatever to have them finalized, or weather conditions, for example. There's also nothing in the ordinance that says that a grading permit must be finalized in order to use the area, and that's really important because a lot of people were misguided by professionals about whether they needed a grading permit, and now we're finding out that they need one and getting after the fact ones, and that's a normal process. And of course, if it's in the area, they can't be told, well, you can't use the entire area like their road or whatever. And then, are you going to request an ordinance change for fencing? I just put a thing in the chat about other fencing stuff that's part of the history. And then finally, it seems that some of the application review for completeness border on issues of substantive review. And I'm wondering if there's a way to make that more efficient so that the planner, once assigned, is actually dealing with some of the issues that are being flagged for corrections rather than completeness. I don't know if you understand what I mean. Thank you.
Yeah, I will address the items that are questions, right, and some of the outstanding stuff that you brought up, Hannah, and let's go from there. I did receive this question about LEAP raids and whether or not eligibility could be determined based on a raid. So right now, I can look at the difference between the language and if it clarifies whether it needs to be a raid that you have a record of or a conviction had to occur. And I think it's fair to look at the difference between those two. The piece that has been brought to my attention or requested is, I believe, to allow for eligibility should any raid have occurred within 5 miles of your location. That I think is a stretch and going to be hard to use as a disproportionate impact. But I am going to have some more conversations about kind of what folks are asking for on this one. So feel free to send a brief email to MCD POD. You can send it, attention Kristen regarding equity. 2022 processing questions in regards to fallowing. I think what we really want to know and it doesn't have tax implications, but it's a disclosure piece that should occur so that we know when you're filing a notice of filing and then wrapping up the second portion of that application process through the affidavit, whether or not you conducted commercial cannabis business activities during that fallowed timeline, right? So that includes processing. So you don't have to tell us, I mean, really, there's no requirement to tell us whether you processed 2021 cannabis or 2022 cannabis. If you fallowed 100% of your mature plant area for 2022 and you processed, we would assume that you processed cannabis left over from the 2021 tax year. And I guess I'll take back that there wouldn't be tax implications, because what the processing of cannabis from the 2021 tax year would have done is potentially generated sales. And so remember, even if you fallowed in 2022, if during that 2022 calendar year, you processed and sold cannabis, right, which may have been left over from the 2021 harvest season, or perhaps the 2020 harvest season, who knows, that sale generates a gross receipts tax filing requirement, right? You're still subject to the gross receipts tax filing. So, you know, you should disclose whether or not you were processing on site. And then do remember that if you sold cannabis during that 2022 season, you should have filed a quarterly tax statement with the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office. I think all of these helpful hints, if we were going to send it out to candidates and then send it out to applicants and permit holders, it would be Kristen writing a newsletter on a very regular basis. That would be amazing if we had funding for a newsletter and we had staff available for a newsletter that could just go through these meetings and make amazing newsletters. And we don't have that. But all of the meetings are posted, not just the YouTube link for folks to view later. And I know, it's hard to get through it. I agree with you, like sitting down and going through a meeting, right? Especially one of ours that doesn't have breaks in it, agenda breaks, which we don't have the staff to create or the tools, resources to create. Can be painful. I was thinking today that maybe one of the things that might be helpful and kind of provide some ease in the pain of finding this information down the road is to put times on the agenda and try to stick with them so folks can, go forward 15 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, right? And hopefully try to catch the rough spot where a topic they're interested may or may not have started, okay? So I am going to start doing that and try to stick with it. And then the questions or the points that you brought up about the building permits, the difference between the language and the ordinance that says obtained is what I'm stating in relationship to finalized. And your question and comment over grading permits. Duly noted, we'll fold it into the conversation with County Council and hope for some clarification from there. So thank you for that. We do have another hand raised from Michael Katz this time. Michael, bear with me just a moment. Okay, you should be able to unmute your microphone and start your question or your comment.
Hello. Yes. Thanks, Kristen. I was just a little confused by the comment about the processing and the related to sales. As we all know, many people who process product in hoping to sell it over the last couple of years have not had access to the market. And so I just, the sales requirements of reporting exist. They stand alone. Mm-hmm. So with following, I don't see how what that relationship really is. I was quite confusing. Also, I was wondering what is limiting at this time the ability to extend compliance plans, and is that something that can be addressed also in your conversations with County Council? I was also, as far as the equity program comments you made, Currently, the raid, the radius for the raids exists, and it says, there's been this question about camp or other raids being able to be identified as criteria or legitimate criteria. And there was a meeting in August of 2021 where Bruce clearly stated, and we've shared the YouTube link of this, that it did not have to specifically be camp. It could be any other law enforcement agency. So I'm just wondering if there has been a specific change to that policy, and if so, where has that been published or communicated? And finally, regards your comments to the canon notes, it's confusing that a system that is designed to provide information to operators about the cannabis program, you're not able to use it because there's not enough staff capability to share information that folks need to be able to operate. So is that something that's looking at being addressed? Thank you. Yeah,
so I think my comments have created some confusion for you. So I'm hoping that this will resolve those. Difference between processing and sales. Processing, if you are processing during a fallowing season, it should be identified on your site plan that you will still be conducting processing on site. When you file your affidavit, if you processed on site, it should say so, right? And I apologize if my train of thought in responding to questions or topics on the fallowing issue created confusion. Processing in of itself does not trigger a tax liability. However, if you conducted sales during the 2022 cultivation season and you were fallowed, you are still responsible for filing your gross tax receipts with Treasurer Tax Collector's Office. I'm well aware that processing doesn't mean sales automatically happened. However, when you file your notice of fallowing and the second portion, the affidavit, you are asked to disclose what commercial cannabis activities occurred on that parcel in association with the AG number that you submitted the fallowing request for. The conversation about building permits started with County Council from the compliance plan perspective, because as I mentioned earlier, we had a lot of questions about like whether or not upon renewal, someone could have a compliance plan for structures that didn't appear in a previous compliance plan, as an example. Right. And so compliance plans are part of the research. How they might be used in relationship to this broader building permit requirement is part of the conversation, definitely. So we'll be getting some more information about compliance plans, how liberally they may or may not be used, and what the expectations are for the completion of a compliance plan. And as that information comes forward, we will bring that back to you. One of the criteria for the local equity entrepreneur program for eligibility, one of the criteria that someone might show to prove, so to speak, that they were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs is having lived through a camp raid that occurred within 5 miles of wherever they were living at the time. That 5-mile radius is specific to a camp raid. Now, if Bruce said something different, he misspoke. And there's nothing I can do about that, but this is what's in the criteria in relationship to being within 5 miles of a raid. That within 5 miles of a raid is specific to a camp raid. And the questions that we're getting asked is, can I become eligible if my neighbor 5 miles away was raided using a search warrant, by the DEA? And so I think we have to consider, does that adequately show that, I was disproportionately impacted because my neighbor 5 miles away was raided by the DEA? I'm sure my neighbor was definitely disproportionately impacted, but would I have even known? So I think this is the question. If I'm understanding what you're proposing, Michael, it's the question that's coming up for the department that we're discussing internally. Canon notes, I'm not saying that we don't use canon notes, but I interpreted the earlier attendees' comments to ask for more than a Canon note that includes, say, the slideshow. Like, sure, we can send the slideshow out after every meeting. We can send the slideshow out and the recording in Canon notes. But what I don't have funding, staff time for is to have someone listen to this meeting and take notes and then formulate a newsletter with all the juicy details that we discussed and the insights that came up, and then format that and get that into a Canon note, right? It's that extra step of compiling the verbal components that go along with the presentation into a message and getting that out in Canon notes on a regular basis is what we don't have time for. We have another caller with their hand raised, and we have a few more minutes. I think we'll take Mr. Paul Hansberry and potentially Susan Tibbin next, and then we will see if there's time left over. We will go back to the Q&A feature. There's a bunch of stuff that looks like it piled up in there. So I'm going to go ahead and Paul, you should be able to unmute your device and ask your questions.
Yes, hi, thanks a lot for having this meeting. And Susan wants to talk after me. I think just for clarification, or at least for my own clarification, if someone were to say to followed for the year of 2022, but they did process some material from 2021 and or made sales of some of that product, the gross receipts would be just from the sales. They wouldn't be then tied into the minimum tax, if I'm understanding correctly.
You are understanding correctly. That is accurate.
Okay, good. Also, with regards to your camp raids, one of the biggest problems that we came across early on in the LEAP is that you can't get the records from law enforcement. They refuse to give you anything because of for privacy or for whatever reason, or that they don't have them. Other reasons was that, you know, some people have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars so that they wouldn't get prosecuted. And they were, you know, arrested, but not prosecuted because they had a plea bargain or a plea deal. So it's very difficult to get that kind of information. And I guess that we were trying to seek alternatives, or at least some sort of way to prove that they're compliant with that, without having the insisting on the letter of what is written in the manual, and using a little bit of discretion to understand what the problems are. Susan would like to have a word with you.
All right, thank you, Paul. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Kristen. Thanks so much for this meeting and for all the detail. Couple of quick things regarding what Paul was just talking about. I'm wondering if we could consider a verified narrative, you know, which would be notarized and sworn to, for people who were in that sort of odd situation where basically it was pay to play for a long time. I think a lot of people remember that. The other thing that is concerning us is, given the present situation climatically in our part of the world, people are, you know, in all goodwill trying to do things like get that fence the way it should be. But if there's a foot or two of water and we have a statewide emergency declared by the governor, I'm wondering if we could look realistically at a case by case and giving people a bit more time. We know of 3 farmers in particular, ourselves among them, where the weather has made it just impossible to do the things in the timely manner that we had originally promised to do and know that we have to do. So thanks for considering that with the team. Thanks, Kristen.
Thanks, Susan. So, you know, I just want to acknowledge that we are well aware that obtaining camp records is outrageously difficult. Yeah, I mean, it has been a challenge, and I don't think anyone ever foresaw it to be such a challenge. so just an FYI, we've been, our cartographer in-house has been mapping all of the active and inactive AGs. So they're all phase 1. It helps us understand a bit where, say, proof of prior was held when folks came into the system or into the program. And so what we're looking to do is, and then we also in December, the Elevate team kindly packaged and shared with the department every camp raid article they had and some, and we spent hours going through them and identifying areas that we had records of camp raids. So we are in a little bit of a slower process than I would like, just because there's so much work to do right now. But we are working through taking those articles, identifying all of the neighborhoods and the phone road references, I should say, so to speak. And we are hoping to produce a bit of a camp raid map. So we also, the Elevate team is going through and flagging everyone who is deemed eligible for a camp raid, and we're looking at those files so that we can use addresses for folks who have been approved, right, to create radiuses around those areas. So this is a really time-consuming process, and I'm so sorry, but it has been a challenging piece of information for all parties to collect. So we are proceeding with putting together a map. It's going to take us a little bit of time. I think it will be at least 30 days or more for us to get that dialed in. And I think before we release it to the public, I'd like to get it in front of Sheriff Kendall in hopes that he might say, oh, well, you missed this spot. We hear you. We do hear the concerns, but it's taking us a little time to put together all the information we've gathered so far from applicants who have been deemed eligible because of camp raids, and really get that onto a map, because we have one cartographer in-house. She's also reviewing applications. And so we have a lot on everyone's plate. So I apologize, but we are trying to address it. With that said, we have 4 minutes. I would like to go back to the Q&A feature. So do any processing or even drying buildings need to have a commercial permit or not? I think it really depends on a couple of things. So can you conduct processing and drying in an egg exempt structure? The short answer to that is yes, if you don't have employees. So employees cannot work in egg exempt structures, and egg exempt structures are limited in how much electricity can be used in them, and you can, under that egg exempt permit. So you can't exceed the standards for the egg exempt permit to conduct processing or drying, and you cannot have employees in an egg exempt structures, but you do need either an egg exempt or a commercial permit for your building if you're going to be doing processing or drying. I was told that I needed to let the planner know when my building permits were finalized, and I thought that was so the planner could check in the system if the permits were finalized. I was told initially that my building permits were showing in the system as not finalized. Would they not then show in the system that my building permits have now been finalized? I think the question here is, how long does it take, gosh darn it, for the system to show that my buildings have been finalized? That's a really good question. I liked when we were in Ukiah, because we've been working with applicants and they're like, oh my gosh, I just was over there and it's finalized. How come it doesn't show and track it, which is the system that we would look in to verify. I don't know why sometimes there's a delay. And so when we were close, we would just walk over and be like, hey, what's up with this? And planning and building would tell us. We do sometimes try to call them to verify if it's not showing and track it. And the planner's been working with someone who we know has been doing the work and should be like right there. They don't always answer the phone. So for some reason, there are sometimes delays between the communication between building permit applicant and planning and building, finalizing a permit, and then that showing and track it. I don't know how long that delay is. I don't know if it always happens, but we've experienced the same thing that this attendee is referencing. We do try to call and verify, I think is all I can say. And I'm not sure why there's a delay or even how long it is. That's really a question for planning and building. The planning and building policy that says that processing can occur in a residential structure that's dated 10/26/22 is in relationship to also having a cottage permit from planning and building to conduct said activities in a residential structure. Now, this is really tricky because if you are processing perhaps, right, in a residential structure under a cottage permit, that residential structure still has to meet the same like ingress egress requirements that are in the state regulations, meaning it can't be solely accessible through the residents of the residential area of the house. It has to have a separate entrance that doesn't take you through the residence, so to speak. So you can't like use a bedroom that doesn't have a separate door, right, to the outside, just as an example, or a den, right? So if you can't enter it by not going through the house, the state regulations don't allow that. It needs to have a unique entrance. Additionally, it has to be kept free of individuals who are younger than 21 years of age. So there's still some pieces, but I believe what this attendee is asking about is the guidance that was posted by Planning and Building Department in relationship to processing under a cottage permit, a cottage industry permit, home business occupation permit. There's about 30 people on today's meeting. And the BOS did rescind the need to have gardens out of the public view space, but they did not rescind the fencing requirement. So, yes, Corinne, your statements here, absolutely, but there's still this requirement for a 6-foot fence around areas where cannabis is grown, unless it's grown indoors. Okay, we're at 5:02. So I do think we should probably go. Thank you everyone for joining, but I'm sure my staff would like to go home, and we're only scheduled till 5. So thank you everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week. Stay dry out there and stay safe. And we'll talk to you next week, maybe at our LEAP meeting on the 18th. Take care. Bye.